Rav Hanan, it is so good to see and hear you. I met you 20 years ago in Jerusalem and got the honor to study with you in a room full of Ethiopian Jews and Ashkenazi Jews and Sephardic. It was like a rainbow of students. And I learned so much just by being in your presence. And I'm so grateful and honored to talk to you today. And welcome to See One Beautiful Soul.
Nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
The main reason that I was so curious to have you here is that you are someone I see identifying as an Orthodox Jew living in the land of Israel. And you have this distinctive, unique purpose that's very obvious to me to make, I want to say, like an intense peace with non-Jewish people living in the region. And last time I did a podcast, I was talking with a Muslim from Egypt also to get a completely different perspective and from someone who lives in the region. And so I'm just so happy and honored to speak with you. So tell me how you got to this place. What changed for you, or was there a change? And, what do you think it was inside of you that gives you this distinctive role in the world?
I was apparently born with an openness to the other. From the very beginning, I have felt that and I've been drawn to that. However, for most of my life, most of my career, that openness to the other was an openness to the Jewish other. Whether as an Orthodox rabbi, I was open to Reform and conservative Jews and rabbis, and I taught them and helped them in their studies and their progress, whether it was my openness to Ethiopian Jews when they first came to Israel, and I got involved in as an activist in helping in their absorption, and whether it was my work with Jewish women and trying to help them to become part of the tradition of Jewish learning. Later on in my career, I got involved in reaching out to Christians, and that was a big step for me. I was serving as a rabbi. I was sent by the Jewish community here in Israel to work as a rabbi in the US. I made connections with Christians, got involved in interfaith dialogue, and I discovered that I could reach a deeper level of human understanding and spirituality from the interfaith dialogue with Christians that I was involved in. And that brought me to dialogue with Muslims. And I felt spiritually enlightened and expanded, such that when I came back home from my stay of a few years in America, came back home to Israel in 2013, I thought I would like to take upon myself a career change. I taught Torah, Judaism to Jews for over 30 years, and now I wanted to do in Israel something like the interfaith dialogue I'd done in America. I began meeting and trying to meet Christian and Muslim clergy people to have an interfaith dialogue. And I realized, wow, how can I have an interfaith dialogue before I know the other as human beings? Now I have to explain what I mean by that. In America, Jews, Christians, and Muslims know each other as human beings. They interact within civil society. They go to the same schools often, the same community centers. They shop in the same place. They work together. They're divided by religion. So they can come together and talk about religion on the basis of their other commonalities, including English language. When I tried to do interfaith dialogue here in Israel, I realized, wow, there's no commonality, there's no common basis. We don't speak the same language literally or figuratively. We don't live in the same society. We're right next to each other, but we're so different. So I realized I was going in the wrong direction. Before Hanan, you try to meet Christians and Jews, try to meet human beings. Then there'll be a basis to meet them as Christians and Jews. And I realized at that point that I'd never met a Palestinian in my life. I've lived among them in Judah and Samaria, what the rest of the world calls the West Bank, for over 34 years at that point. They're 80% of the population, perhaps more, but I live in my Jewish bubble with all my other Jewish neighbors, and we don't know who they are at all. So I went on a mission to meet the other. A lot of stories of how that happened started like this. One of the additional impetuses that brought me to meet Palestinians was I was driving my car. This must have been the end of 2013 in Judea and Samaria, around where I live. The area is called Gush Etzion. I had two Protestant pastors with me from the US in the car. They're visiting from
Hold
the
on one
US.
second. So do you live in what's called the occupied territories? Do you live in
I
the
live
Jewish?
in what's called occupied territory, half hour south of Jerusalem. And
Okay,
I'm
we're
happy
gonna
to talk.
put a pin in that. We can talk
Right,
about what that
exactly,
means later.
exactly. So they wanted to show them how the biblical prophecies of the Jewish people coming home after years of exile are coming true. And with great pride, we drove around and I showed them everything we've accomplished in these past 50, 60 years. So as we're driving, I picked up a hitchhiker. Then I picked up a second hitchhiker. And when the second hitchhiker asked to get out of the car and the two of them left, one of the pastors turned to me and he said, Hanan, that was a great thing you did. Picked up hitchhikers, you taught us a lesson in Jewish ethics. They said no one in Texas ever does that. They come from Texas, at least one of them. So I said to them, the pastor from Texas was Bob Roberts. I said, Bob, it's not just me. We all pick up hitchhikers around here because we have a common mission. We have a common identity. We trust each other. And I do my best to pick up every person who puts out his finger for a ride. And by the time I finished that story, I realized I was lying. I was lying to Bob and Kevin. And even worse, I was lying to myself. I said I pick up every person. What I should have said is I pick up every Jew. I'd never picked up a Palestinian in my life. I'd never thought of picking up a Palestinian. And I didn't even realize that I don't pick up Palestinians because I never noticed they were there. In other words, and it hit me like a ton of bricks, that the Palestinians don't exist for me. They don't exist as human beings. And I felt terrible. And perhaps because they're pastors and I'm a rabbi, I felt like it was, to use Catholic terms, like confession. Here are these two pastors, and I suddenly realized in their presence that I have this moral blemish, that I don't see the people around me as human beings. So I said to them, I'm going to have to do something about this, about my spiritual blindness. And I said to myself, what I have to do is meet Palestinians, and then they'll become human for me. I took that upon myself. And after a few months, perhaps it was a few weeks, a few months, weeks, I realized that I was failing. No one can introduce me to them. There's literally a Palestinian village of 500 meters from my front door. 600 people live there. I couldn't find a way to meet anyone there. What am I going to do? Knock on their door and say, I have to meet you? Anyway, finally it happened over Facebook. Another Protestant pastor, a different one in the US, wrote to me that he can arrange it for me to meet Palestinians who was coming to the Holy Land. Pastor John sat in my living room, January 2014. He told me his whole story, he won't go into it. And he told me when and where I should go to meet Palestinians. Okay, was it going to be a week and a half later? The day rolls around. The last Wednesday of January 2014 in the afternoon. I get up from my chair in my living room. My wife says, where are you going? I said, I'm going to meet Palestinians. And she screams, you can't do that, they'll kill you. I remember approaching her and seeing the terror in her eyes. She begged me not to go. I knew I had to do this. And I didn't tell her that I was afraid as she was. So I walk out of the house, my heart is pounding, didn't know what they do to me. I didn't take the car. I had a map that said, walk here, here. I walked about 22 minutes and I got there. So I walk in to this metal gate surrounding that's the gate to a compound surrounded by rock fence, Palestinian farmland in the middle of nowhere. I walk in, there's no buildings there. There's no animals. But I saw something that can't be. I saw a miracle. I saw 15 Israelis and 15 Palestinians. They were doing something that I've never seen before. They were talking to each other. Not formally, but there was groups of 2 here and 3 here and 4 here. There was one woman who wasn't talking to anyone. Muslim, head to toe in brown, clearly observant. I walked right up to her and I said hello. She said hello back to me. After about a minute of talking in English, I said, I can't believe I'm talking to you. And she answers me, I can't believe I'm talking to you because we don't talk to Israeli settlers. Slight pause, but we continued. And then just, I think 3 or 4 minutes passed, not more, her son comes over. She tells me his name is Yazin, he's 17 years old. We shake hands, start to talk. And you see that Yazin's wearing a jacket. And on the jacket are written 3 words in English over the heart. And the words were seeds of peace. Seeds of peace. Now, I did not know what seeds of peace is, no idea. But I knew something, one thing for certain. He's a Palestinian. His jacket says peace. Here are 2 things that can't go together. Peace and Palestinian, because I knew they're all terrorists. So I said to myself, he probably doesn't know what the jacket says. He probably found it, someone gave it to him. Half jokingly, I said, Yazin, what's seeds of peace? And instead of telling me, I don't know, he tells me it's the name of a summer camp in Maine, USA. A camp that takes Israeli kids and Palestinian kids out of the conflict zone for a summer of recreation and reconciliation. He said he got back from that camp a few months ago, spent the summer there. And he told me he met Israeli kids, their friends on Facebook, had a great time. And he told me he was so affected by that summer that now he wants to spend some of his life building bridges of peace between our 2 peoples. And I remember looking at Yazin and smiling and listening, unsure if I can believe what he's saying. There can't be such a camp, and Palestinian kids can't go there because Palestinians are brutal, they're violent, they're terrorists. And I got confused. And you might say that Yazin was the first Palestinian that began the process of unsettling me. And then his father walks over. Jamal and I shake hands. He's a short, stocky guy. Intimidating, I would say. He tells me they're from Beit Umar. Whoa, Beit Umar? My heart skips a beat. I know Beit Umar. It's 5-minute ride down the road towards Hebron to the south. And I've driven on that road many times. There's a sharp bend there. My car has been stoned. I've come up against machsumim, against roadblocks in the middle of the road, afraid I'm going to be attacked, ambushed. And I have an acquaintance. I had an acquaintance, Dr. Shmuley Gilis, who was murdered while he was driving home from Hadassah Hospital, where he was taking care of Jewish and Arab patients. So I know the people in Beit Umar, they're terrorists. And now I'm meeting one of them. And this guy, Jamal, how can I talk to him? So it wasn't easy, it was challenging. But we talked, and he tells me, like, the story of his life. 2 anecdotes I remember are the following. He says, Hanan, you know, there's no Israelis, there's no Jews in Beit Umar. We're all Muslims, Palestinians. And because the only Jews we really know, the only Israelis we really know, are the Israeli soldiers who guard the entrance to the village and make life difficult for us. We hate the soldiers, so we hate all Israelis, we hate all Jews. There's no one in Beit Umar, he told me, who would ever want to meet a Jew over a cup of coffee. Except, he said, for this neighbor he had long time ago. And this neighbor of his told Jamal, come with me to Jericho, the city of Jericho. I go to interfaith dialogue sessions. There are Jews and Muslims. Come and meet them. And Jamal said to me in our conversation, Hanan, I told my friend I'll never, ever come with you. That's only for the weak people and the traitors. But the friend wouldn't get off Jamal's back. He tagged along once. Jamal told me about the experience of being in that room with Israeli Jews. Sat in a big circle. Jamal said, I didn't sit in the circle. I sat in the corner. I didn't participate, but I listened. And at one point, one of the Israeli Jews got up from his chair, Jamal tells me, and he looked at me, at Jamal. Made me really uptight. He started walking towards me. I was really afraid. He came right up to me and he forced me to shake his hand. And then he talked to me, asked me questions, I had to answer his questions. We had a conversation, God forbid. And when the guy finally left, Jamal says, I wiped the sweat off my brow and ran to the bathroom to wipe the tumah, how do you say, the filth off my hand from touching an Israeli Jew, and I vowed never to come back to this terrible place. Jamal goes home, tells his wife about this very bad experience. She agrees it was a big mistake to go there and they should never tell anyone. Of course, never go back. But Jamal's friend says, Jamal, come with me next time. Jamal says, no, come with me, no, come with me, no. In the end, Jamal went back with his wife because she wanted to make sure and she wanted to tell the people off. So they went there and they went a second time and a third time and they brought their kids. And Jamal ends the story and he tells me, Hanan, where I thought there was only an enemy, I met a human being who turned out to be a partner. And that changed me. I'm listening to the story and I don't know what to do with myself. This story contradicts everything I know to be possible, everything I know to be true. Jamal tells me another story. He says, Hanan, you know, there's lots of little kids in Beit Umar. And a lot of them, when they see someone who looks like you, they start to cry. I said, what are you talking about? Why do they start to cry? And he got offended when I said, I don't understand. He was like frustrated. He said, you don't get it? It's the kippah you have on your head. And it's that beard. Because everyone who looks like you, they walk into Beit Umar with submachine guns, and they kill the kids. So I thought that was borderline anti-Semitic. How does he think such ridiculous things? And I wanted to tell him off. But somehow I understood that my job at that moment was not to tell him off, it was to absorb his experience. I understood that was a moment of blessing for me. Because for the first time in my life, I'm experiencing how the other experiences me. And what I have to do is hold it, hold the experience and listen. I didn't say anything. And then a light bulb goes off in my mind and I see in my mind's eye, my family, my sons, my son-in-law, with other friends walking out of a lunch food on a tiyul, on a trip in the fields. And of course, my son-in-law and my two sons are carrying pistols. Everyone carries a pistol. And I suddenly realized these little kids in Beit Umar, when they see these different looking Israeli Jews carrying guns, that's frightening. So I said to Jamal, what do you want? We carry guns because we're afraid of you. And he looked at me as if I fell from the moon. He said, what are you talking about? You're not afraid of us because we're afraid of you. And that was a moment of utter understanding and utter ununderstanding at the same time. They're afraid of us. Why are they afraid of us? Oh, they are afraid of us. But how could they be afraid of us? Who's afraid of who? And I walked away from Jamal challenged, confused, upset. A lot of people I talked to that day. At the end, we sat in a circle, 15 Israelis and 15 Palestinians. And Ali Abu Awad, the Palestinian owner of the land we were sitting on and the Palestinian convener of the event, he said, thank you everyone for coming to my family land. Welcome. I'm Ali Abu Awad, a proud Palestinian from an old Palestinian family, father and grandfather and great-father from Kubeba. Today, you guys call it Lachish, Kiryat Gat. 1948, father told us that the Israelis came and threw us out. We walked the 20 miles or so to Beit Umar, we settled here. 1967, you Israelis came again. And since then, we're living under the difficulties and the suffering of the Israeli occupation. And I don't hear the words he used after Israeli occupation because my mind was fixated. What's this Israeli occupation thing? What is he talking about? Now, I had never, ever in my life heard a human being use those two words in my presence. Of course, I heard on the radio and the newspaper, but here's someone telling him he lives under Israeli occupation, which means my occupation. But where does this thing exist? I've never seen it. Because when I drive on the roads of Samaria, when I walk in the fields of Judea, I don't see occupation. I see the return of the Jewish people to our ancient homeland after 2,000 years of exile. What could be more righteous than that? It was only 5 years after the Holocaust, 3 years after the Holocaust, we declared the state of Israel, one little dot on the map where we can put our tired, bedraggled, half-dead bodies. And now this Ali Abu Awad character is telling me that he lives under my occupation. And from telling the stories of his family's experience, I realized that my people's triumph is his people's tragedy, and my people's justice is his people's suffering. And it was so hard to hear. Now, he wasn't trying to convince me of anything. He was talking to a group of people, his life story, not anything political. And he told how, as a young man, he saw Israeli soldiers come into the house in the middle of the night and beat up his mother. She was taken away to jail. He told us he was sentenced to 10 years in Israeli jail and never told the charges against him. Even his lawyer wasn't told. There was a secret file that can't be revealed. And he told how he was threatened by the interrogators that if he doesn't confess to things he didn't do, he'd be put 10 years in jail. And he was. And he then talks about how he, in jail, learned Gandhi and learned Martin Luther King and came out of jail as a non-violent peace activist. All this blew my mind. I was upset, I was angry, I was confused. I felt like I was falling into a black hole. And I went home that day. I remember days walking back and forth in my study, feeling my stomach is churning. I'm getting nauseous. It's like I have to bend down and pick the stomach up and put it back in because I'm so confused. Really, I felt that I couldn't go on. Ali made his story so real and it contradicts my story. How can I live with a contradiction? And I went and I searched out Ali Abuwad. I found him in the same place that I first met him. And I said, I have to talk to you. And I wasn't the only Israeli that wanted to talk to him. And he wasn't the only Palestinian that started to gather around there. And we talked. Must have been at the beginning, 12, 15 people. We sat in a circle, I would say once a week, for weeks upon weeks upon weeks. And I don't know how this happened. We didn't set down any ground rules, but somehow we managed almost always not to yell and scream and not to try and prove that they're wrong and we're right. We just told stories and listened to stories. Ali told the story of his people, of his experience, of his suffering, of everything that happened in jail, everything he learned from Martin Luther King, all his experience with violence and nonviolence, about suffering and about aspirations, about identity. And I have to say, there were multiple times when I felt that Ali telling the story of his people was like a dagger to my heart, because his story contradicts my story. And it was the urge to argue, to disagree, to yell, or just to leave was so great. But we stayed and listened. And when we Israeli Jews told the story of our identity of 3,000 years of connection to the land of Israel, of 2,000 years of exile, of coming home after all those years to the land of Israel, well, when an Israeli Jew from New York tells a Palestinian he's come home to the land of Israel, that's like a dagger to the Palestinian heart because it contradicts everything he knows. But they listened. And after a few months of tremendously difficult listening, Ali said, Hanan, we have to find a way to fit two truths into one heart and two peoples into one land. And I'll tell you some of the insights we came to. We learned, we saw, we felt that most Palestinians go to sleep at night hoping and dreaming and praying that the Israelis will disappear tomorrow, because they'll learn they don't belong here and they'll leave. And we Israelis go to sleep at night certain that the day will come when the Palestinians will disappear, because they'll understand that's ours and not theirs. And then we saw that no one's going anywhere. The Palestinians have no other place to go. And we Jews certainly have no other place to go. It's home for both of us. And furthermore, we began to see how each side builds its identity upon the nullification of the other side's identity. You know what the Palestinians say? They say, Jew, beautiful religion, but it's a religion, it's not a people. A religion doesn't need a land. So go back to Russia. You know, any Palestinian told me go back to Russia? Or go back to New York. What are you taking our land for? What are you colonizing the place? Settlers, foreigners. And you know what the Israelis say to the Palestinians? Palestinian? No, there's no such thing as Palestinian. There never was a Palestinian state. You're Arabs. You can be in Jordan, Syria. Go back where you came from. Go back to Lebanon. Why are you here taking our land? And each side thinks they can tell the other side who they are. And we began to realize you can't tell anyone who they are. You have to listen and let them speak. That's who they are, who they say they are. And the other side as well. And we Israelis began to understand that the Palestinians belong here. And the Palestinians began to understand that the Israelis belong here. But to say the words I just said is almost impossible for both sides because it contradicts everything we're trained in. We're trained in a zero-sum game. It's them or us. And if we admit anything is true about them, then it undermines our identity in both directions. And we began to realize you don't have to be wrong for me to be right. It could be your land and it's still my land. And I'll say something that many people, most people who are not involved in what I'm involved in will sound heretical. The whole land from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea is Palestine. And the same whole land from the Mediterranean Sea to the Jordan River is Israel. That's historically true. And it's certainly the truth of identity. And there's no other way forward except to recognize our truth and their truth at the same time. So we began to realize we created something new. I'll explain why this is new. Because until the present, of course, there have been peace movements before Oslo, after Oslo, but almost all of the peace movements, had been secular Muslim Palestinians talking to secular Israeli Jews, in which each side doesn't bring the fullness of its identity to the table because they don't carry it in their heart. And what that means is peace has been a matter of universals meeting universal, human beings meeting human beings, which is great. I love human beings. I'm one of them. But it hasn't been Jews meeting Muslims. It hasn't been strong Zionists meeting strong Palestinian nationalists. And what we were doing and what I just described was Jews who were deeply connected to the land, to Zionism, to the Bible, to Judaism, meeting Palestinians who were religious Muslims, who are refugees from 1948, who've been in Israeli jail. The people with the strongest identities on both sides began to listen to each other. And it may have happened a little bit in the past, but we felt we were bringing it to a whole new level. And we founded Roots. We didn't intend to found an organization, but that's what happened. It's about roots in the plural. Muslim Palestinian roots and Jewish Israeli Zionist roots meeting. We call ourselves in Hebrew Shorashim and Arabic Judor, the Israeli Palestinian Grassroots Initiative for Understanding, Nonviolence, and Transformation. It's about expanding identity. I don't have to undo or erase who I am. I'm a Jew, a Zionist, a settler. I'm deeply connected to this land. I believe that the Jewish connection to it is eternal and legitimate, but that cannot come at the expense of another people that also has a historical, religious, legitimate connection to that same land. So I expand my identity to continue being who I am, but also to be a little bit of the other. That's what we're doing in Roots. That's what the Palestinians also in Roots are doing. We're a joint initiative, the Israeli-Palestinian Grassroots Initiative for Understanding, Nonviolence, and Transformation. I'll add, there's so much I can add, but I'll just add a little bit, which I'll add that I didn't talk about politics. But that does not mean that politics is unimportant in my eyes or in Ruth's eyes. Politics is extremely important. We believe that the present political reality of occupation, and we'll get to the occupation thing, we said we'd pin it, the present reality is wrong. It's bad. It's bad for both sides. It should change yesterday, if not yesterday, tomorrow. It has to change politically. So why didn't I talk about politics? Why am I not a political activist? The reason is because we've learned in Roots that there are political questions of borders, of security of resources, but the issues are much deeper. This is a conflict over identity. Who are we and who are they? What land is this, Israel or Palestine? And therefore, political negotiations of take and give are important and they have to take place. But if they're not accompanied by and even preceded by a expansion of identity, a recognition, a trust, a embrace of the truth of the other side's understanding of who he or she is, if that doesn't come first, then political negotiations will blow up in our faces like Oslo did. If it doesn't take into account identity, if it's not based upon this expanded identity, Oslo created enemies. The religious Jews most connected to land, the religious Muslims most connected to land, they blew it up in our faces because they weren't involved in it. They weren't, because it was between secular Jews and secular Muslims. So in Roots' understanding, we are creating the human groundwork for a better future of dignity, equality, human rights, respect and recognition on this little sliver of land that both sides call home.
Okay, well, I haven't stopped crying since you started talking, and I want to talk about why I'm crying. Because I think it's actually what this whole talk is about. I came from a home that there was a lot of fighting, and I never felt home in my home. I think a lot of my listeners can relate to that because I come from a generation where over 50% of my generation, our parents got divorced. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because when we spoke the other day, and I told you that I'm having a conflict right now because I see all this anti-Semitism and horrific battling of this, who's a bigger influencer, and Bella Hadid, 47 million people looking at her post saying Israel is a genocidal force. It hurts me. And it makes me feel like my home is in trouble. And when I went to Israel in 2001, right around the time that I met you, I felt home and I couldn't understand it, even though I'd never lived in Israel. And I developed my own narrative. I looked at this land and I was there during the Intifada. I left the World Trade Center. I don't know if you knew that, to go on this trip to Israel to learn about my roots. And on September 11th, 2001, I decided to get a cell phone for the first time. And as I'm standing in the Cellcom Shalom store on Khanfei Nesharim in Har Nof, the Twin Towers fall down and I think, oh my gosh, God saved my life. I'm standing in Israel, learning in yeshiva without a television set about my people. And I'm buying a cell phone at the exact moment that the Twin Tower, and we're watching it happen in real time. And I'm having this like completely metaphysical experience. And at the same time, someone's getting run over by a Palestinian a few yards away, and there's shootings every day, and we're hearing the bombings in Gilo. And I leave Israel with PTSD, and I'm just hafuch, like I'm all over the place. And so my narrative began then, where I'm feeling at home in a place that's in complete chaos. When I was in Israel, Even in 2001, I used to talk to Palestinians every day. I would find one to talk to and I'd say, how's it going? And, you think there'll ever be peace? And I've always been a peacenik. I've always wanted, because I've always seen one beautiful soul. But as we were talking the other day, and you said something so profound, you said, we can't have peace until we have healing. If we tried to make peace right now, it wouldn't work because there's too much narrative. Even if you're open-minded, there's too much, the story is too great. And the last conversation I had with this beautiful Muslim, Hussein Abu Bakr, we talked about fundamental beliefs and how destructive fundamental beliefs plus a narrative can be. And as you're speaking, I'm thinking, it's the politics. It's the politics that get in the way. It's Iran giving money to Hamas to shoot rockets into Israel. It's we're right, they're wrong. It's this president over that prime minister and this political party. Politics to me has become the new religion. And that's why I started this podcast, is because I want you to pick a faith, even if it's a combination. Like I sometimes feel a little Buddhist because I meditate every day. So I guess I'm a Jew-boo, but I think faith is so important. I think a set of values and laws are so important. And I think that they all should come up along with a little card that we look at every day. Is this hurting anybody? Is this hurting myself? Is this hurting the world? What's the future going to be if I keep going on this path with my fundamental beliefs saying that this group doesn't exist? This group doesn't matter, or this group is full of fill in the blank, terrorists, racists. How do we reconcile the history of people who are fundamentalist Muslims who learn from a young age, maybe along with the politics of it, Jews are evil, Christians are evil, we need to eradicate them in order to have our full third jihad come to the world? Like we learn these things. I don't know if that's even true, but from what I've researched and what I've seen, there is a group, maybe it's a small group, but it's been there where this is the fundamental belief system. And I talked about it last time with Hussein, and he said he decided to start asking questions about that. Well, how could this whole group of people be evil? So how do you reconcile that history?
I think I can understand both sides here. We know, as part of our historical consciousness, that we lived in this land for 1,000 years, from the time of Joshua to the time of the fall of the Second Temple. We know that it's our homeland. We have archaeological artifacts from then. We have written texts, and we have the historical memory. We say at the Seder, the Passover Seder, "B'chol dor v'dor chayav adam le'ot et atzmo ki'ilu hu yatzav mitzrayim." In every generation, one must see himself as if he personally went out of Egypt. That sense, it's not just for the Exodus from Egypt. All of Jewish history, we train ourselves and our students and our children to feel as if we were there. It's part, our identity is all of the Jewish people. And for 2,000 years of exile, we've been hoping and praying and yearning to come home. Very strongly, 3 times a day, we say we want to come home to Israel. And then the Zionist movement was created as a political platform to allow us to fulfill those dreams. It makes total sense that when we came home in 1860 and 1880 and in 1900 and 1920, and also in the year 2000 and 2010, it makes perfect sense that we're so excited to come home that we don't notice that someone else has been here before us in the past 2,000 years. It's a documented phenomena that we only live within our own story. You don't see what we're not prepared by our education identity to see. By and large, the Zionists in the 19th and 20th, 21st centuries didn't see that there are people here. indigenous people who've been living here for hundreds of years, perhaps some of them were even here 2,000 years. We didn't see. And our narrative, our exclusivist narrative, tells us that it's our home, it's our land, and they can stay, but as our guests. And if they don't behave properly, they don't belong here. I understand where that attitude comes from, but it's still wrong. And on the other side, Palestinians, I understand, they do have a connectedness to this land, families that have been here for hundreds and more years, Christians and Muslims. They're in the same village as their great, 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 great grandfather, and sometimes even more than that. They don't know that the Jews were here before them, and they don't have to know, they don't care. And suddenly in 1816, 1880, and 1900, these Jews come pouring in, they say, we're going to create a Jewish state. I can understand the resentment that causes, it's obvious. There's, of course, so much involved here, but both sides developed an exclusivist identity. I call it the hubris of exclusivity. It's a disease. That's why I said to you in our previous conversation, we need healing from that disease of the hubris of exclusivity. So it's understandable, but it has to change. If it doesn't change, we'll continue to kill each other. In other words, I'm identifying the ultimate source of violence in identity, religion and identity, which means that peace will come, as I said, not just through a treaty and through political negotiations. There has to be a process of reconciliation, of healing trauma, of recognition of the other's identity, etc.
I want to make very clear that when you say I'm learning their identity, you're not saying, Rav Hanan is not saying, and so now I get that we should all kill the Jews, or now I understand their political platform, or that idea that part of their identity is totally right that they should want to kill. No, what you're saying is there's a person, you're talking more about the beautiful parts of their fundamental beliefs there, and the fact that they may believe this is their home, just like you believe that this is your home, and you're having a conflict there, but you see the whole person. You don't see someone sitting there who's correct in wanting to kill someone just because of other. Yes?
Of course. Let me see what I can add to that. I have certainly met Palestinians who've said that this land is Muslim land and the Jews don't belong here. I've certainly met Palestinians who've said it's legitimate to kill Israelis because force is the only thing that you guys understand. The only way to free our land is to kill you. I've heard all those things. And my job is to, number one, listen, understand where it's coming from. And number two, to help that person understand differently because of meeting me. It's not that I convince him that he's wrong by an academic or rational argument, rather by coming face to face with my identity, my people's connection to this land, my people's suffering, my people's coming home, my people's effort to secure our own security for the future. That Palestinian begins to expand his identity, just like I expanded my identity by meeting his people. And what happens in the end, and I know hundreds of cases in which the Israeli Jew begins to see the truth and the legitimate grievances of the Palestinian, and the Palestinian begins to see and understand the truth of the Israeli identity and the legitimate grievances and aspirations of the Israeli Jew Zionist. And then we become advocates, not just for me, but for you as well. We do not become advocates of you and not me. but we come to a place of understanding that I want to and I should be allowed to actualize my identity, but not at your expense, and vice versa. That this doesn't have to be a zero-sum game.
Right. I agree with that. And I think I'd like to see if you had, we'll have to like 12 principles of faith and how to have dialogue and what it would look like to actually be advocates for each other and for human life, just for humanity to be peaceful in general. What I'm lacking is I feel like because so many Jews and Israelis are constantly feeling like we have to defend ourselves for the rights to the land, because it seems like so many people, so many more people than there are Jews here on the earth, are against us living in our land, that we spend all this time logically proving that we're actually really good people, that we're not taking some of that same energy to prove that we belong there and we're good and we're trying to be the best that we can. We're not using that energy to help Arabs all over the world who are, in my opinion, being tyrannized by their own governments and terrorist organizations. When I hear you talk about it, I just start to cry, because I believe what you're doing is God's work. I believe we all should be doing this. As much as we should be proving, that's what I'm trying to say, as much as we should be proving that we're correct and we deserve to be in the land, we should all be having circles every day. It should be part of our daily life to have a conversation with someone who's, not Jewish, and talk to them about just how are you? Like, get away from the politics, get away from the fundamental religious beliefs, and just, by the way, how are you? Amazing things can happen when you do that.
So I think that one of the many ways to respond to what you said is to delve into the matter of trauma. The Jewish people are a traumatized people. We've suffered 2,000 years of exile, of persecution, of pogroms, of anti-Semitism, of the Inquisition, of the Holocaust. And of course, to a certain degree, we are a self-traumatizing people, because we've used the memory of what the others have done to us as a way of strengthening our own in-group identity. We say in the Passover Seder that B'chol dor v'dor omdim aleinu lechalotenu, every generation they come to exterminate us. And we've come to expect that from the world, that's the way it's supposed to be. Actually, in the Midrashic literature, it's really true that that's part of the nature of the world that God has created. According to some strands of thought, they're supposed to persecute us and we're supposed to barely survive. And we came home to Israel 100 years ago, the Jewish people, through the Zionist movement. And because of many, many, many factors, we have this conflict between our two peoples, Israel and Palestine. And we Jews, to a large degree, have interpreted the Palestinian-Israeli conflict in terms of that saying from the Passover Seder, in every generation, they come to annihilate us. In other words, today, many of us, many of us, Israeli Jews, unconsciously and sometimes consciously see the Palestinians as the next iteration of Hitler, who was the next iteration of Chmelnytsky, who was the next iteration of the Inquisition, going back all the way to the Roman destruction of the Second Temple. And we see here a pattern, we think we see a pattern, that's the way things are. They're always going to be against us. There's nothing we can do about it. We just have to sit tight and hold them off, defend ourselves, maintain our exclusivist identity. And given that trauma and that re-traumatizing, and it's happening again and again before our eyes with every war in Gaza, we're traumatized and our narratives are re-traumatizing us. Under those conditions, it's very hard for someone to say, I want to meet my Palestinian neighbor. But
Yeah,
nevertheless, we have to do it.
wonderful work that you're doing, where it's healing first and then peace. I mean, that is the most brilliant thing I've heard in a really long time.
Thank you.
To say, how can we learn more about you? What can we do to support you in your efforts?
The website is friendsofroots.net, friendsofroots.net. On Facebook, it's Friends of Roots. It's written on our website, what we are on Instagram. We urge people to look at the website, learn about our work, sign up for the quarterly newsletter there, like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram. I recommend to people to join interfaith dialogue groups in their home cities and towns. Jews, Christians, Muslims, and other religions, to meet the other, talk to the other. People that if they're Jewish and they come to visit Israel, they should also visit Palestine. And if they're Palestinian or liberal Christians who come to visit Palestine, they should come also to visit Israel. I tell people learning Hebrew, learn Arabic also. I tell people learning Arabic to learn Hebrew also. I say to use social media to spread the good news and not the bad news. Everyone else is spreading the bad news. And when you spread only the bad news and you read only the bad news, you think that's all that's happening. And that creates despair, and it weakens those of us who would like to try and do something. You come to the conclusion, nothing you can do. But if you spread the good news, and there is good news, you have to find it because often it's not reported. If you spread the good news, that creates hope. And hope creates a sense of agency that, yes, something can be done. There's a group of people doing it. I can join them. I can do it. In and of itself, if you do nothing else, just spreading the good news has a positive effect. If we had 10,000 people decided only to spread the good news on Facebook, that could make a sea change. To never spread the bad news, let other people do it. Just to even out the impression, again, to create hope. Of course, we want people to visit Roots. When they come to visit Israel, Palestine, they should come to visit us. The website can tell you how. To listen to our webinars, to invite us to do a webinar for your synagogue, church, mosque, university, community center. To invite us to speak face-to-face in synagogues, churches, mosques. We're doing a speaking tour, another one November 5th to 21st of 2021. Myself and one of my Palestinian partners will be speaking in 20 or 30 institutions during a 3-week period across the country. Invite us to speak. It spreads the word, creates hope, gives you agency, and also, of course, raises money for us, which brings us to the last thing, give us money. We need millions and millions of dollars. Healing, trauma therapy, summer camps, state camps, youth movements, little kids, older kids, adults, men, women, bring people together in all these different types of groups costs a lot of money. And the truth is that there are just about no large funds, philanthropic funds that would support us, because what we're doing, we're not making secular peace, we're making religious peace. We're bringing the radicals, the people most invested in working against peace, we're bringing them together. We work with Hamas, not formally, work with people who've been connected to Hamas. We work with people who've been in Israeli jail. We work with people who you would call terrorists. Yes, we work with those people, and they're changed. And that's powerful. We believe that the land belongs to both sides, from the river to the sea. And we still believe in reconciliation. There are not too many, like I said, funds that support that type of work. We work in the occupied territories, bring us back to that word occupied. Almost no funds give money to creating reconciliation in occupied territories. So
that was the other thing I was going to ask you is how do you justify that you're living in an occupied territory right now?
So let me speak a little bit about that. Let me talk about a conversation I once had with a friend of mine living here in the same settlement I live in. The conversation went like this. Hanan uses the word occupation in some sentence. Friend says there's no occupation. Hanan says there's an occupation. Friend says there's no occupation. Hanan says there's an occupation. End of the conversation. Now, what happens in those conversations? There's something that Ariel Sharon once said, right? A right winger in Israel, if there ever was one. He said, when we argue over if there's an occupation or there's an occupation, we're just not getting the terms straight. You have to distinguish between land and people. There's no doubt that the Palestinian people live under occupation. If you want to talk about the land, we can legitimately disagree. In legal terms, in sociological terms, is the land occupied? I can say it's not occupied, you can say it is occupied, or vice versa, but there's no doubt that the people live under occupation. I have a Palestinian friend who always tells the story that he's sitting in a conversation and a Jewish speaker is explaining why there's no occupation. And the Palestinian is saying to himself, but I live under occupation. Where do I get a permit to enter Israel? From the military. Who's the governor of my area? It's an Israeli general. Who controls the water? It's an Israeli general. Who, the police is the Israeli army. Of course, I live under occupation. If you want to say the land isn't occupied because it's Jewish, then you can say that, and perhaps you're right. But the Palestinian people are an occupied people.
How do you justify living in the occupied territories? You're living there, and you're also trying to support people who are saying, telling you you're occupying their land right now.
That's a really important question. So first of all, I believe, just like the Palestinian people have a connection to the whole land from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, I believe the Jewish people have a deep historical, religious connection to the whole land, the same whole land, from the Mediterranean Sea to the Jordan River. And I believe that both sides, including my side, should have the right to live in any part of that land that he or she chooses. So to say that the West Bank / Judea and Samaria should not have Jews living in it is wrong. I live in Judea and Samaria because it's my homeland and I should have the right to live here. That's for sure. However, I do believe that the way my people, the Jewish people, has exercised its right to live in Judea and Samaria is wrong. The right is true and legitimate, but the way we've been exercising that right is wrong, because we've been exercising our right at the expense of the other side. We've constructed a system of occupation that is good for us and bad for them, that gives us rights and takes rights away from them. And that is wrong.
So how do you live there?
Right, I have to continue. So I'm certainly against the structure, the systematic structure of life that I live within. How do I justify it? The truth is that it's a matter I struggle with. But when I ask my Palestinian partners what I should do, they want me to stay. It always comes down to that. Number one, because they don't want their people creating justice by way of creating injustice. They already said they don't want their people exercising their right to Palestine by throwing Jews out. They don't want to make it Juden-ridden. They don't want to be those who are creating injustice in the effort to create justice. And secondly, they would rather have Hanan Schlesinger as an advocate for Palestinian rights where he is now than living in Tel Aviv or New York. This is the heart of the conflict zone. Palestinians don't need more settlers, but they need more settlers like me. They need more roots. So I am living in an ambiguous moral situation. To leave Judea and Samaria would be immoral. To stay here is also immoral because of the system of life that justifies and allows my existence. So what I have to do is stay where I am and do my best to change the system.
And that's, I think, what the answer is for all Jews and all Palestinians and all Muslims as well, is to be a Rav Hanan Schlesinger, like wherever you are right now, for all people really, fight the good fight for human rights, even at the expense of whatever your political beliefs are, what your fundamental religious beliefs are. Really check in to see what those are, because if you're really being, I believe deep down, everyone really wants that anyway. That's it. My grandma used to say, why can't they stop already? We just want to love each other. Why are they being so mean? But there's this, it's so weird as we grieve and cry about they're going to exterminate us. Stop saying they want to kill us. Start saying we all want to get along.
Yeah, it's identity on both sides that is fueling this conflict. And going back to what you said a minute ago, that so many people want peace. Well, we have to make sure that while we want peace, we're not acting in a fashion that makes war. In too many cases, we say we want peace, but we're acting in a fashion and talking in a fashion and believing in a fashion that actually creates more conflict.
Give me an example. What's something we shouldn't say?
Just what we're saying right now. If an Israeli Jew says, I want peace, why are they killing us? And continues, say, to vote for parties that continue a militaristic approach to this conflict and continue ignoring Palestinian humanity and dignity and rights. Of course, we do it without realizing it, we're doing it. There's so much Israel is doing right now to continue to fuel this conflict, to continue this conflict. Again, we don't do it on purpose, we don't do it knowingly, and the other side does it as well. But we could end this conflict if we wanted. Who is we? Israelis and Palestinians. It's not God's decree that we keep killing each other. It's our mistakes. It's our weaknesses. It's our sins. Again, ours means both sides that are causing us to kill each other. We can stop.
I was studying this. I'll end on this because I know you have a million people's lives to save, so I'm gonna let you go. But I've been learning this whole year with Dr. Joe Dispenza and this small group of really loving, we're called healers, and we do this coherence healing where we send out loving energy to the entire world. And it sounds really woo-woo and hokey. I'm loving it because for the first time in a very long time, I'm sitting with people of all races, genders, sexual orientations, religious beliefs, and all we do is just send love into the world. It's really holy. I do it a couple times a week, and we have wonderful meetings about it. And it's all about really changing the energy of the entire world to what's called like the 5D, like this new vision of like hope and peace and prosperity. I think it's very messianic and really beautiful. And I can't even explain what's happening in there. My dad's doing it. He's in chemo right now and his numbers are going up, thank God. And I've been sending people who have physical ailments and it's really helping them. I believe it's just a portal for a bunch of people to sit around and say, I believe in God. I believe in oneness. And I believe that everyone is healing. And as soon as you take a deep breath and you just imagine the whole world healing, it really works. I believe this. And when I heard you speak the other day and you said healing first, then peace, I thought to myself, you can't really be on a platform fighting for peace, fighting for rights, and believe that the world is fully healed and there's a possibility for complete reconciliation and love at the same time. You just can't, because one is saying, I have to fight for my rights, and it's like this, and the other one is a very calm, I just believe that everything's good and all is one. And that's when I started to feel within myself, I've got to talk to Rav Hanan Schlesinger more because he is doing it. I can feel just in the way that you speak about it, you're on this level of energy. It's like it's like another Like, oh, there's all those people fighting down there or on the side over here. And I'm over here just believing in peace, really believing we can achieve it, really knowing that two people with completely opposing sort of fundamental religious beliefs can live in the same land and say, it's mine, but it's actually ours. And, I love you and you love me, and we're respecting each other. So thank you for getting my heart opened a little bit more to that idea, and also helping me to acknowledge what I've known all along, which is you can't really have both at the same time. Does that make sense to you too?
Both at the same time, meaning what are the two boths?
You can't really say there is a possibility for complete peace and oneness, and at the same time be saying, I have to fight for my rights and I have to fight the social media campaign and all these, for instance, like Gabor Mate. I sent you that
Yes.
interview. And what did you say to it when he was interviewed by Russell Brand, to saying Israel's a genocidal place and it's worse than the Holocaust, and multiply what Hamas does times 1,000, you won't even get close to what Israel's done to them. I'm butchering the quote, but that's basically what he said. And what did you say back?
I think I said three things. Number one, that there is exaggerated language in what I heard. Number two, there's no larger and historical context in what I heard. What was the third thing I said?
Some of what he was saying was correct.
Right, that's the fourth thing, and that there's a us versus them mentality, zero-sum game in what I said. But after all those 3 points, I think 80 to 85% of the things I heard in that podcast are true.
Do you think you can believe in a true peace and at the same time believe in fighting for rights at the same time?
Yes, I do, but it has to be done properly. And I'm not sure we have the time or the context here to talk about that. I would like to close with what I close all my talks with, which is this: if you began to listen to this session today as a strong supporter of Palestine, I hope you leave this session as a strong supporter of Palestine. And if you entered this session today as a strong supporter of Israel, I hope you leave as a strong supporter of Israel. But I hope that neither the first person nor the second person leaves as a strong supporter of one side at the expense of the other side. To support one side at the expense of the other side, to be against the other side, is only a recipe for more war and conflict. What we need are people who are strong supporters of Israel and strong supporters of Palestine at the very same time. That's the only way to be a strong supporter of reconciliation and peace.
Thank you so much. I have not stopped crying this whole time. I have a frog in my throat. I'm so blown away by your courage.
Thanks.
And you haven't aged a bit since 20 years ago. And God bless you, and may God continue to fuel you with an inner peace that's so beautiful, and it's so simple in a way that it really is more contagious than the pandemic, and we all get sick with it in a good way, that we all have that, because we really need it.
Wonderful blessing. Thank you.
Amen.
Amen, amen, amen.